Hey you, and before we begin hunting a possibly framed killer in this old video, I would like to let you know that this video is sponsored by Untitled. Untitled is a subscription service. You play a private detective tasked with solving a fictional crime. Every month you get sent a box of evidence, comprised of video, audio, interviews, autopsy reports, photos, and other bits and pieces of evidence. Your goal in this is to analyze those documents, narrow down your list of suspects as the case unfolds, and catch the real killer. They sent me a season and honestly I enjoyed the heck out of it, staying in for hours at a time, going through, all of the evidence and documents and debating it for ages. And you really have to use a lot of your real world knowledge at times, so you have to put your thinking cap, detective's cap, on. To get 20% off your first box, please visit huntakiller.com/thatchapter and use code CHAPTER. Also, part of the proceeds go to the Cold Case Foundation, an organization that works to bring justice and restoration to cold cases, something we chinwag about all the time. So once again, that's huntakiller.com/thatchapter and use code CHAPTER at checkout for 20% off your first box. Honestly, you would love it. And if you like true crime and thrillers and, hey, if you're here, you would enjoy the hell out of it. It really puts you in the detective's shoes. So thank you so much to Untitled for sponsoring this old video. Now how about we do exactly that? Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this old video we're going to talk about the, just crazy case of David Camm. Genuinely, we got multiple trials, a guy who was framed, two guys who may have been framed, we just got it all. This case takes us to Indiana, and State Trooper David Camm. This occurred in the year 2000. David Camm would go on trial 3 times for, you know what, actually I don't want to spoil anything. Let's just have a go. David Camm and his wife Kimberly Wren were both born and raised in New Albany, a town of about 35,000 people. David met Kim in 1984. David had been previously married to his high school sweetheart, but that fell apart, and David had a daughter from that first marriage. David and Kim got married in 1989, and that same year, David applied to the Indiana State Police, and he done got in. So he was working away, made a really good impression, don't you know, and even actually not long after he successfully entered the Indiana State Police, he actually was selected to join the Emergency Response Unit. He was that good. David and Kim's first child was born in 1993, Bradley Camm. However, not long after, David began to have an affair with a local woman. He actually moved out of the house he shared with his wife Kim and their son and moved in with this other woman. Yikes. Now that didn't last long. He eventually moved back in with his family and they reconciled. In 1995, another child was born, Jill, and that same year, Kim and David began construction of a house on Lockhart Road. Funnily enough, the road was named after David's family on his mother's side. The Lockharts, that's how entrenched they were in the local area. So things were hunky-dory, at the end of the 90s. Kim had a great job working in insurance, making shitload of money, rising up the ranks. David, he actually eventually started working for his uncle, his uncle's basement waterproofing business. He handed in his resignation for the Indiana State Police, where he'd worked for 10 years because he was making double the money for his uncle's business. So it was yeah. He still remained good friends though with his cop buddies, and the kids, they were doing great in school. It's all good. They were a happy little family. But of course, just when things seem at their height, here comes the fall. On the 28th of September 2000, a Thursday, in a church rec center in Georgetown, Indiana, a usual basketball game was going on. This went on every Thursday at about 7 p.m. It was just the usual pick-up basketball game, 10 or 11 people playing. David was one of them. This Thursday was like any other Thursday For the Camm family, David and Kim were both working all that day. Kim picked up the kids after swim practice. They had both spoken to numerous people on the phone that day. By all accounts, it was just a regular day for the Camms. Now, at about 9:20, David headed home after the basketball game. It was about 5 minutes away. David was actually racing home because he was a little later than usual, and he knew Kim would be pissed at him because he wasn't there to help with the kids' homework. And, they had to have their homework done before they went to bed, and he was kind of like, oh, man, I'm going to get bollocking when I get home. He pulled into the driveway, clicked the little clicker yoke to make the garage door go up, and as it rose, he saw a nightmare. He saw his wife Kim on the garage floor, a pool of blood coming from her head. The door of her car beside her was open. He ran in. Obviously, seeing the car door open, he poked his head in and saw both his kids sitting in the back seat. Didn't look good. His police training kicked in, and he knew instantly that his wife and daughter, Jill, 5 years old, they were both dead. But his 7-year-old son, Bradley, he thought he might still be a little warm. He pulled him out of the car, started doing CPR, but to no avail. David then called his old workplace, the Indiana State Police.
Indiana State Police Radio, Patrice, can I help you?
Patrice, it's Dave Camm. Let me talk to Post Command right now.
Okay, he's on another line.
Right now, let me talk to Post Command.
Hold on.
Dave? Get everybody out here to my house now. Okay, all right. My wife and my kids are dead. Get everybody out here to my house. Go to Dave Camm's house now. Everything's going to be okay, all right? We're going to get people. Everything's not okay. Get everybody out here now. They're coming. Go to Dave Camm's house now. Okay.
He then ran across the road to his uncle's house, who was also a former police officer. He came over, saw the scene, and had to physically drag David out of the garage. He was, as you can imagine, he was inconsolable. The police arrived after 9:30 p.m. Kim, Bradley, and Jill had been shot. Kim had no pants on, so sex crime possibly. The kids, maybe, them just being there, being witnesses, they were shot too. Beside Bradley was a grey sweatshirt. It wasn't from the house. And so a homicide investigation began. David's old colleagues, the Indiana State Police, would be the ones investigating. So the lead investigator, actually an old friend of David's, spoke to David that night. And, usually in these cases of spouses being killed, where do all eyes usually go? First off. But it seemed to be just a formality at this stage that they would speak to David. He was an ex-cop being interviewed by his old colleagues, his friends. And, they knew where he had been, so he didn't do it.
I'm here at the Indiana State Police Post, and also present is David Camm. We're going to try and find out what happened here, so we can bring that person to justice as best we know how.
Do it right.
Right,
So,
exactly.
ask for everyone to ask.
He told them everything he knew about the day, and about Kim's day too. She would have arrived home shortly after 7:30 p.m. Nope, no known enemies, stalkers, nothing like that. One weird thing about the scene was that Kim's shoes were on top of her car, which obviously was odd. David had no idea why they were there.
I have no idea why she was there.
Does she ever kick her shoes off when she's driving?
Never seen her take her shoes off. Never.
You saw those shoes, though.
Damn straight I did.
This was not something she normally did, and it seemed like the attack had happened pretty immediately when her and the kids arrived back home. So, that day they took the clothing David was wearing, clothing that was covered in blood after he had taken his son Bradley out of the car when he tried to resuscitate him. The clothes were taken for testing. 3 days after the murder, the police got David in for another interview. And so this is when the first theory that, people have when these kind of cases happen, that theory became a reality for David.
Because of the high profile of this case, because of, obviously, as you know, well, no right, we're doing this all by the numbers. People heard something they thought was unusual. When we talked to them, they said it sounded like gunfire. The time was when you were already home.
Which was?
around 9:20, shortly thereafter. And this is just facts. I'm just telling you what
It's wrong. It's
what these
wrong.
people making up this time.
I'm telling you, people are confused. The time element is off. It's not right. It's not right. It's not right. It's not right, guys. You're not right. You're wrong. You're wrong, wrong, wrong. You're wrong, Daryl. You're wrong. This is not right. You're getting off the track. Something's not right here. Now fix it.
Blood on your shirt, and they'll have a DNA analyzed. This is the presumptive test that it is high velocity blood spatter. It's scientific documentation. The only way that comes on is from blowback or blowout from a gunshot wound.
That is supposed to be on my t-shirt that I play ball in. It's on. Yeah. It's wrong, Daryl.
Dave,
Wrong, guys.
what do we do when they tell us that? Now we got to figure out
You
why.
better find another expert.
This man, and he's very, he's renowned as far as his expertise. This is not something he just started to do yesterday.
The t-shirt that I had on was what I had on. That's what I wore over, and that's what I wore home. And any blood it's got on it now came from either an impression of something I leaned on in the car, or it came off of Brad himself.
Tried to clean this up. Tried to clean some of the blood up or something like that.
No. This is ridiculous.
What about some bleach, Dave?
No. No. I didn't clean up. Somebody may have, but it wasn't me. That person is your suspect. She was molested. It happened that day, that night. That's when it happened. And it wasn't by me. You guys are wrong here. You're wrong, Mickey. I did not do this. I did not do this.
Who did do it?
I don't know. That's why I called you guys. That's what your job, that's what you're supposed to be doing. You're looking so hard at me.
We look at everybody, Dave, but honestly,
But Mickey, you're so off base. You're so wrong. You're so wrong, Mickey.
See, a neighbour had heard gunshots at about 9:20 p.m, which was when David came home. The clothing David had given to the police, the clothing he was wearing when he found his family, and had been wearing at the basketball game, it obviously had blood on it, but not just that. It had blood spatter on it, which an analyst would say could only come from high-velocity blowback from a gun, basically shooting someone at close range. Quick note, by the way, the person who said that the spatter on his clothing came from a high-velocity, gunshot at close range, that was the crime scene photographer Robert Stites. Not an analyst, by the way. The police just, thought he was a blood spatter analyst. Yeah, lads, sure, that's definitely high-velocity blood spatter. I know what I'm talking about. There were also signs of a cleaning in the garage, like someone had, tried to clean the scene, clean up the blood. And there were signs of trauma to the genital area of Jill, his youngest daughter. That very day, David Camm was arrested and charged with the murders of his wife and 2 children. All the while, David was, vehemently protesting his innocence. So things were not looking good for David. An ex-cop, possibly, child abuser, murdered his own family. And this was, this is a quiet area. This kind of stuff never really happened, so big news. So months went by, David was in jail, and the prosecution began to formulate a timeline. They originally said the murders occurred at about 9:20 or so, when he arrived home after the basketball game. But when the time of death was proven to have been between 7:30 and 8 p.m, they said that David went to the basketball game, ducked out, drove 5 minutes home, killed his family, drove 5 minutes back, and then went back to playing ball. They said this was proven by a call made from David's landline phone to a customer at 7:19 p.m. They said the crime scene was staged. Remember Kim's pants had been taken off? They said, David would just try and make it look like a home invasion, like someone had, assaulted his wife and killed his kids. And of course his cop history was used against him. He's an ex-cop. He knows how to, make things look like what they're supposed to look like. And of course what was also used against David was, his affair that he'd had years before. But a few weeks before Kim was killed, she had called a friend to say history was repeating itself. Now, she didn't explain what she meant by that, but the friend took it to mean one thing. At trial, the prosecution brought in over a dozen women they said David had been hitting on, slept with, been fooling around with while he was a cop, using his badge for no good. And then the injuries to his daughter Jill, well, they said they were consistent with sexual abuse. Well, the prosecution said that. The medical examiner just said she had injuries there when she was killed. So we got an ex-cop who slept around, abused his daughter, had blood spatter on his shirt, and had been at the house, and made a call at the house around the same time or not long before the murders happened when he said he was at a basketball game. Anyways, case closed. Eat a dick, defense. The trial began on February 2002. David pled not guilty. Now, the defense couldn't argue against David Camm's philandering, having an affair, multiple affairs maybe. But they said, the injuries to his daughter Jill, they were done by whoever did the attack. The blood spatter on his shirt, that was done when he was getting his son Bradley out of the car and his shirt brushed against Jill's hair and her hair had blood in it. And the prosecution's timeline, that he made a phone call from his house at 7:19 p.m. and then went back to the basketball game. Well, during the trial, the defense called in a Verizon phone guy. And he said, the phone call at 7:19 p.m., that was incorrect. This was due to time zones in Indiana. Indiana has 2 time zones, Eastern and Central. So the 7:19 timestamp was actually 6:19 for David. Which, he said, yeah, I called a customer before I went to basketball at 7. And then, more importantly, there was like 11 people at the basketball game. All of them said he was there the entire evening. He never left. And another thing, they never found a murder weapon. The prosecution also said, there was some kind of cleanup, which was also incorrect. It was just the way blood went after being exposed to air after a period of time. Remember there was a sweatshirt found beside Bradley? On the collar was written backbone. No one knew what that meant. It wasn't David's. Well, analysis was done on that. DNA was found, but no match. However, that kind of went nowhere, even though it was unexplained. Ultimately, David Camm was found guilty of murdering his family. He was sentenced to 195 years in prison, which seems like overkill. 2 years later, David Camm's conviction was overturned, his appeal successful. The Court of Appeals agreed with David's new defense team that the dozen women who had all, testified saying he had groped them, hit on them, whatever, well, that never should have been allowed. So, there would be a second trial. This time, the defense was going to go back to that sweatshirt, that grey sweatshirt that was found beside young Bradley, and, DNA tested again. Maybe it'll match this time, this is 3 years since the first trial. And guess what? It did. A fella named Charles Boney. Charles Boney's prison nickname was Backbone. Charles had a history of violent crimes against women. He also had a history of stealing women's shoes, nicknamed the Shoe Bandit. He had many assault charges, at one point even tried to kidnap 3 women at gunpoint. He had been sentenced to 20 years for armed robbery for that one, released after 7. He was out on parole during the Camm murders. He loved the feet, real foot fetish guy. Kim had bruising on her feet, her shoes on top of the car. Neatly placed, by the way. And his sweatshirt was there, so his DNA was also already in the system when the original DNA search was done, during the first trial. When the prosecution said, yeah, we ran that for DNA and it came up no match, so straight up lied. Well, see, the prosecution actually said, oh yeah, we actually sent the wrong sample, to be DNA tested. Whoops, our bad. In actuality, it's likely they probably never actually bothered their arse. to send it to be DNA analyzed, DNA tested, ran through the database because they were like, it's David Camm. Why bother? It's just going to be David Camm's DNA on it, even though that's, you know, not his shirt. So, Charles Boney was brought in. He admitted the shirt was his, by the way, but said he'd given it to charity, which I don't think the Salvation Army would want it.
That sweatshirt is in the middle of a crime scene of a triple homicide. Somehow that sweatshirt got there, your sweatshirt. You explain to me how it got there.
I have no idea.
It shows up at a crime scene, not laundered, not washed. If it went through the Salvation Army drop box, that would have been a clean sweatshirt. Your DNA, chances are, probably wouldn't have been on there. But it is.
I see where you're coming from.
You know David Camm?
No.
You ever met David Camm?
No.
Do you remember the murder of David Camm's family?
On television, yes.
Do you know where David Camm lives?
Only on television.
Make no mistake about it. If anything else links you to it, you're done. Stick a fork in you.
And see, that would normally worry me. I wasn't there.
He didn't budge an inch. However, 2 weeks later, a palm print was found on the car that matched old Charlie. So, Charles was brought in again, and he had some whoppers to tell the cops.
Got some explaining to do here, Charles. Your palm print is on that Bronco. You're there. Now this is the time, this is the place. This is your last stage that you're going to have to tell us what the hell happened there. This is it.
This can't be happening.
Charles!
The reason why I was there was to bring up the gun. That night. That night.
Sure, he knew David Camm. They actually played some b-ball together. And, I shit you not, he was actually there the night of the murders, but he didn't kill anybody. He was selling David a gun, and he witnessed David murder his family. They were in cahoots. So, both David Camm and Charles Boney were charged with the 3 murders. David, as you can imagine, was like, what the shit? The deaths of his 3 family members was the exact thing Charles was doing before, only he hadn't killed anybody. You know, assaulted people, threatened them with guns, a weird foot fetish, stealing shoes. But nah, those bad boys were in it together. The prosecution went back to David's shirt with the blood spatter on it, something that was not on Charles's shirt. So therefore David was still in on it, and they both went on trial separately. Charles Boney was found guilty of the 3 murders, although they said he wasn't the killer. So they believed his story, but nonetheless he was sentenced to 225 years. David went on trial again. This time the prosecution pointed to him molesting his daughter. Kim found out and was going to leave him, and so he killed them all. Now, as I said, there was no evidence David Camm was molesting his daughter. The injuries seemed that she had were just there that night, but it didn't matter. He was found guilty again. David's defense appealed again, and it was successful in 2009. There was no evidence he molested his daughter. So, trial number 3. It would begin in August 2013.
Good afternoon to you. I'm Ann Bowden.
I'm John Bowl. Late breaking news out of Floyd County. Just last hour, the prosecutor announced that twice convicted murderer David Camm will be put on trial for a 3rd time.
Steve Bergen was there when the news broke, and he joins us now live with the late breaking details. Steve.
And John, Floyd County prosecutor Keith Henderson admits he has a lot to overcome. Now, Camm's first conviction was overthrown because the prosecutor brought up Camm's extramarital affairs, which had nothing to do with the murders of his wife and 2 children. The second conviction was overturned because Henderson suggested Camm's motive for the killings was to cover up the molestation of Camm's daughter.
The prosecution were still determined to get David. The scene was staged and he was framing Charles Boney. Also, didn't Kim have some life insurance? Classic every time. Charles would be the star witness against David because he's a believable guy. Again, he said he met David a few times, sold him a gun, and was there the night of the murders.
Charles Boney told jurors he heard David Camm shoot his wife and their children. Boney is serving a life sentence for the murders, but in court today, he said he had little to do with them.
I have no comment. Have a good morning, though.
He even said that David tried to kill him after he killed his family, but the gun jammed. David then ran into his house. Charles walked into the garage, saw the bodies, put the shoes on top of the car for some reason, because he was just tidying up. Never touched the bodies. When he heard David inside the house, thinking he was getting another gun, he fled. That was his story. He was sticking to it and explained why his DNA was there, why the palm print was found on the car. Though it didn't explain why his sweatshirt was there. Well, for Boney, because it was found that he did touch the victims when he said he didn't. Touch DNA was found consistent with Charles in multiple places on the clothing of both Kim and Jill. It was also found on Kim Camm's panties, the arm of her shirt, on Kim's broken off fingernail, and on Jill's shirt. More and more holes were poked in Charles's story. He wasn't able to describe David's car, said he wore the wrong clothing that night. And after 10 hours of deliberation, David Camm was found
not guilty on all counts.
Not guilty. David Camm exploded in tears and bellowed loudly in the courtroom.
Not guilty of killing his wife and children 13 years ago in his third trial for murder. Very unusual case. David Camm had been convicted by 2 juries, but both convictions were overturned.
This is complete vindication after 13 horrific years.
I've always believed, ultimately, that the truth would prevail. Find strength in that. I've always believed on the issues that we've raised that have caused these reversals, that we were right. So, you know, you just, it's really a survival mode.
Were you close with the other troopers? Yeah?
I used the word betrayal earlier. You know, some of these people they were family. Brothers, sisters, love. Would have done anything for them. And the one moment in my life where I needed somebody to do something for me, yeah, they turned me back. So
you went from being the good guy to a bad guy virtually overnight.
I really, within a fraction of a second.
You think about him every day?
I dream about him every night.
In 2014, David Camm tried to sue the state and the county for $30 million. This was dismissed by a US district court, as they said there was probable cause to arrest him in the first place. In 2019, however, this was reversed by a court of appeals, and he can now sue for false arrest. Kim's parents believe, by the way, that David killed their daughter and their grandchildren.
It's hard, and I mean, this was my daughter and my grandkids, and every day I have to live with this. And it's just, I don't know, I just want justice for them, because in my heart, I really believe that David is guilty.
Charles Boney still sticks to his story that he was there that night, but David was the one who did it.
I'm clearly an African American in a predominantly white area. And I do believe that. I think race played a big part in it. We're clearly both there, and one of us is the killer. David Camm is the killer. On September 28th, I took a second untraceable weapon to the Camm residence. David Camm showed up. We were talking outside of his house. His wife, Kim Camm, and the 2 children, Brad and Jill, pulled up in I believe it was a black Bronco. As the garage door lifted up, she drove in. I seen her brake lights come on, and then he went into the garage, and then I heard arguing, and I heard a no, and then I heard a daddy no, and then I heard pop, pop, pop. At the end of the day, David Camm has to answer to God. People get away with stuff all the time. I think he'll kill again.
But if, the truth is what was found, which I believe it to be, then David went through 13 horrific years after having, one of the most nightmarish, unimaginable things happen to him in the first place to start it off, finding his wife and children dead. It's really interesting how determined the prosecution were to nail David Camm to the wall, even when they already had the guy who was the most likely perpetrator, and with a fair amount of evidence he did it. But, they still had a hard-on for David. The case against David Camm has been heavily criticised, and for good reason. The prosecution was guilty of, in all 3 trials, multiple cases of being shitty. Thankfully, it's finally over for David Camm now. I mean, he still lost his entire family, lost 13 years of his life. Well, I hope it's over. So when does trial number 4 begin? Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I will see you as always real soon in the next video. Take care of yourselves. Mike out.